Which of the following best describes Azure Cloud Shell? A web-based interface for managing Azure resources using a browser. B, a desktop application for managing Azure resources. C, a mobile app for managing Azure resources on the go. D, a command line tool for managing on-premises resources. The correct answer is A, a web-based interface for managing Azure resources using a browser. Azure Cloud Shell is a web-based interface that allows users to manage Azure resources directly from a browser. It provides access to both Azure CLI and Azure PowerShell. The other options do not accurately describe Azure Cloud Shell. What is a key benefit of using Azure Cloud Shell? A, it requires installation on the local machine. B, it provides a consistent environment across different devices. C, it only supports Azure CLI. D, it is only available for Windows operating systems. The correct answer is B. It provides a consistent environment across different devices. Azure Cloud Shell provides a consistent environment across different devices because it is accessed through a web browser. It does not require installation on the local machine and supports both Azure CLI and Azure PowerShell. It is available for multiple operating systems. You need to automate a task in Azure using a scripting language. Which tool would you use in Azure Cloud Shell? Azure CLI only, as it supports scripting. B, Azure PowerShell only, as it supports scripting. C, both Azure CLI and Azure PowerShell, as both support scripting. D, neither, as Azure Cloud Shell does not support scripting. The correct answer is C, both Azure CLI and Azure PowerShell, as both support scripting. Both Azure CLI and Azure PowerShell support scripting and can be used in Azure Cloud Shell to automate tasks. Azure Cloud Shell provides access to both tools, making it versatile for different scripting needs. A user wants to manage Azure resources using a command line interface but prefers a Linux environment. Which option should they choose in Azure Cloud Shell? Azure PowerShell, as it is designed for Linux environments. B, Azure CLI, as it is designed for Linux environments. C, both Azure CLI and Azure PowerShell, as both can run in a Linux environment. D, neither, as Azure Cloud Shell does not support Linux environments. The correct answer is C, both Azure CLI and Azure PowerShell, as both can run in a Linux environment. Both Azure CLI and Azure PowerShell can run in a Linux environment within Azure Cloud Shell. Azure CLI is natively designed for cross-platform use, and Azure PowerShell can also be used in Linux environments. What is the primary purpose of Azure CLI in Azure Cloud Shell? A, to provide a graphical user interface for managing Azure resources. B, to offer a command line interface for managing Azure resources. C, to manage on-premises resources using a command line interface. D, to provide a mobile-friendly interface for managing Azure resources. The correct answer is B, to offer a command line interface for managing Azure resources. The primary purpose of Azure CLI and Azure Cloud Shell is to offer a command line interface for managing Azure resources. It is not a graphical user interface, nor is it designed for managing on-premises resources or providing a mobile-friendly interface. A user is experiencing issues with a script in Azure Cloud Shell. What is the best practice for troubleshooting? Check the script for syntax errors and correct them. B, restart the Azure Cloud Shell session and try again. C, switch between Azure CLI and Azure PowerShell to see if the issue persists. D, contact Azure support immediately without attempting any troubleshooting steps. The correct answer is A. Check the script for syntax errors and correct them. The best practice for troubleshooting a script in Azure Cloud Shell is to first check the script for syntax errors and correct them. Restarting the session or switching between tools may help, but the primary step should be to ensure the script is correctly written. Contacting support should be a last resort after attempting basic troubleshooting steps.